Hi and welcome back. Now I know that at the end of my last video I said that I would finish doing the weed spraying offline so that you didn't have to see another video of me spraying weeds, but I simply haven't had time to get onto the game and do that, so I'm afraid that you're going to be stuck with me spraying some more weeds still. But I figure that's probably alright, because I think my videos are a wee bit like videos that a friend of mine, Atomic67, used to do, called Chewing the Fat, where you're probably tuning into my video more to listen to what I have to say rather than to actually pick up farming tips or anything anyway. So if I'm just weed spraying again for another video I talk, it's probably not really a big deal to any of you. I thought today, rather than talk to you about a particular part of New Zealand, I want to talk to you about New Zealand as a whole, and kind of give you a brief introduction to New Zealand for anyone who might want to come here and visit one day or anything like that. So New Zealand is made up of 3 islands technically. There's the North Island, the South Island and Stewart Island at the very bottom of the country. Now Stewart Island is it's where there's a lot of wildlife and things. People can't go there without bookings, I believe, and things, so unless you were really into your conservation of things, you wouldn't go to Stewart Island at all. It's pretty well uninhabited by humans to a large degree. So we're really only talking about the North Island and the South Island. Now the North Island and South Island are very long. When you look at them on a globe or something, they're quite long. So New Zealand's quite a long country. It's very skinny, and that's one thing that a lot of tourists will find strange straight away. So it means that all of New Zealand is all in the same time zone. We are actually long enough that if you turned the whole country 90 degrees, we would span multiple time zones, but because of the way it is, all of New Zealand is in the same time zone, so same time everywhere in the country. Now each island, the North Island and the South Island, would take about 12 hours to drive the length of the island, and it's a 3-hour ferry trip to get from one island to the other. You could fly that, but if you were, say, wanting to take a car with you or something like that, then you would have to take the ferry across, and that's going to be a 3-hour ferry trip between the 2 islands. However, because they're quite skinny islands, it would never be more, no matter whereabouts in New Zealand you are, it would never be more than about a 3-hour drive to get from one side of the country to the other if you were driving east to west. Now what that means is that every New Zealander is never very far from a beach. Okay? I have heard that in America there's some old people in their 70s, 80s and 90s that have never ever seen a beach or the ocean in their whole life, and that certainly would not be the case in New Zealand. Okay, in New Zealand everyone who's more than 12 months old has been to the beach at least once. It also means, because we have a mountain range that basically runs a large proportion of the length of the country in the middle of the islands, that it's actually possible to go skiing in the morning and then go swimming at the beach in the afternoon if you were keen enough and you wanted to do that. So it's certainly feasible for you to do that if you wanted to. Now, one thing that a lot of tourists in New Zealand, one mistake they make, and I'm going to tell you about this, so if any of you want to come to New Zealand, you can save yourself an awful lot of money by not making the same mistake everyone makes. Basically, pretty much all of our international flights come into or go out of Auckland. So what tourists tend to do is they fly into Auckland, then they either rent a car if they're planning on staying at motels and hotels, or if they want to do it a bit cheaper, they rent a camper van and they drive down the length of the North Island, and they take the camper van on the ferry across the South Island, and they drive down normally to either Christchurch or Queenstown, and then they leave the camper van there, fly back up to Auckland, and then fly out of the country again from there. Okay, what this means, what this results in, is that all of these rental car companies that rent out cars and camper vans that are all situated in Auckland end up with all their cars and camper vans being left down in either Christchurch or Queenstown, and they need them back in Auckland to rent to the next lot of tourists that come in. So you can pick up some really, really good deals going if you're heading north rather than south. You might be given a camper van free for a week, and if you want extra days you have to pay for them, but you can have it free for a week. Or same with the rental cars, often you'll be given free rental car if you're travelling north, or if not free then very, very cheap. So if any of you are ever going to come to New Zealand, one thing I'd highly recommend you do to save a lot of money is fly into Auckland, because you pretty much have to do that, then jump on an internal flight straight away to either Christchurch or Queenstown, then from there rent a camper van or car and drive it back to Auckland for the rental car company, and you'll save an awful lot of money. It does mean you'll see the country in the opposite direction from what most international tourists see it in, but you'll still see all the same things. It'll just be in the opposite order than what most people would see it in. But that will save you so much money, it's just unbelievable. And local Kiwis know that, but overseas tourists don't, so they end up paying an awful lot of money to rent a rental vehicle in Auckland and then leave it in the South Island when they fly back to Auckland to fly out of the country again. And yeah, they spend an awful lot of money that they really wouldn't need to if they knew about that. Another thing that's probably, if you're in America especially, first of all let me talk about our speed limits, okay? So generally, and there's a few exceptions to this, but generally speaking, in the towns our speed limit is 50 kilometres an hour, which is 31 miles an hour, and on the open road the speed limit is 100 kilometres an hour, which is 62 miles an hour. So that's generally the speed limits in New Zealand. Now, what I was going to say is, one thing that for American tourists especially they'll find quite strange normally, because it's so weird to them, is that in New Zealand there are pretty much no guns. Okay, unless you are a hunter, you're not going to own a gun at all. And even the gun laws that we have in New Zealand, so even if you were a hunter and you had a gun, you've got to keep your gun locked up in a gun safe, you've got to keep your ammunition locked up in a separate place in the house, you've got to keep your magazine locked up in a separate place yet again. So that's 3 different places you'd have to have things locked up in. So in all honesty, even if you owned a gun, to actually get access to a working gun, putting all these bits together and putting the ammo and all that, it's going to be like at least 5 or 10 minutes. So you couldn't just pick up a loaded weapon, and certainly nobody, and I mean nobody, not even the police, walk around with guns. So yeah, even our police don't carry guns. Now it probably seems very, very strange to Americans in particular, but what you've got to remember is that because New Zealand is an island, or 2 islands, and there's always been rules around guns, so there wasn't a time when it was legal for just anyone who wants to have a gun. There's never a time like that. So therefore there's very few guns in the country, and being islands you can't sort of sneak them in very easily because they'll be picked up at the ports or the airports. So unless you were involved in the gangs or in the drug scene, the illegal drug scene, you could very, very easily in New Zealand go your whole life without ever setting eyes on a gun. To put this into perspective, the only time in my whole life I've ever held and fired a gun was when I was about 10 years old. I went to a YMCA camp and they had a firing range set up there, and I remember I wasn't very good at it because of course I had no practice. So in all honesty I wouldn't be able to hit a barn door from 6 feet away, sort of thing. But that's New Zealand, and as I said, because it's always been that way, it doesn't seem strange or unusual to us. So to an American it would probably seem quite unusual. What do you mean you can't own a gun and you can't have a gun and carry a gun with you? But that's New Zealand, you just can't do that, and because it's the way we've always grown up, it doesn't seem foreign to us. In fact, the opposite sounds true, most New Zealanders would find it very strange to think that, like in America, you could just walk around with a gun in your belt if you wanted to, or something like that. It's so foreign. So I'm not having a go at Americans here or anything like this. Okay, if I was born in America and that's the way it had always been, then that would seem right to me. And so I'm not knocking this. I'm not being anti-gun here. I'm just saying, in New Zealand, it's not like that. So, don't bring your weapon with you if you're coming to New Zealand on holiday, because you won't be allowed it in the country. That's the New Zealand way. We just do not have any guns. And as a result, again, unless you got involved heavily with illegal drugs or got involved with gangs, you're exceedingly unlikely to be involved in any kind of gun violence in New Zealand, because there just aren't the guns here. So yeah, you could very, very easily go your whole life without ever seeing a gun or anything like that in New Zealand. What else was I going to say about New Zealand? Okay, another thing about New Zealand is that not only are you never ever very far away from a beach, you're also never very far away from natural bush and things. So we have a lot of natural bush. Even if you're in Auckland, which is New Zealand's biggest city, or in Wellington, which is our capital city, you could the nearest bushy reserve or park and grassland area is never more than a walk away. So, actually I don't need to go back this way, did I? I need to go the other way. So just turn around up here, so yeah, if for example you want to sit in a glass glade or something to eat your lunch, there's always going to be a nice grassed area within easy walking distance to wherever you are in New Zealand, always. In fact, one of the nicest grassed areas to go and sit at, if you're in our capital city, Wellington City, is going down and sitting on Parliament grounds to eat your lunch there, and that's quite pleasant in fact. Now, New Zealand Parliament's quite funny. Like, you need to book in advance, but you can actually go into the Parliament buildings and sit and watch a political debate if you wanted to. And local schools, always arrange a school trip to go and do that. We also, the restaurant at Parliament, where all the politicians eat their lunch and things, is called Bellamy's, and you can actually book to go and dine at Bellamy's. I think for members of the public you can only book for dinner time, but you'll quite often run into one or more politicians here if you go to Bellamy's for dinner. Now again, you do need to book in advance for that, and I must admit that Bellamy's is the one place where when you turn up, they do have security guards, they do have a metal detector you have to walk through, you have to leave anything metal you've got, like car keys or anything, with the security guards at the front desk area, and they will escort you up to Bellamy's, and you get escorted out again afterwards, and you get your keys and things back at that time. So security at Bellamy's is probably higher than, is it about airport levels, I'd say, and that's New Zealand Airport, which probably isn't as high on the security thing as what you'd be used to having. In New Zealand, pretty well everyone owns a car. In fact, often a family will have more than one car. That's quite common now, although our vehicle fleet is older than what a lot of countries have. It's not as old as it used to be now. I apologise for my wife's phone going off in the background there. I don't know how to turn the damn thing off, so it'll just go off occasionally, and I'll just ignore it because it's my wife's phone that's going off and not mine. That's alright. What was I saying? So yeah, everyone has a car. Our fleet's newer than it used to be now because we've got Japanese imports. Now, funny thing is, we drive on the left in New Zealand, and in Japan they drive on the left as well, so they're right-hand drive cars. Now, as a result, there's a lot of Japanese imports that come into New Zealand because Japan have rules around what age a car can be to still be used. So basically, I think once a car reaches about 10 years old in Japan, you're basically not allowed it on the roads any longer. So They used to scrap them, but now they import them into New Zealand on the whole. So the majority of cars in New Zealand are Japanese import cars. Okay? You can buy some brand new cars in New Zealand, but they're not cheap. The cars, nothing big in New Zealand is cheap. Housing isn't cheap, cars aren't cheap, and that's because we're an island, so it costs a lot of money to get these things imported and things like that. So buying a brand new car, it's very, very conceivable. I mean, I'm 54 years old. I've never ever in my whole life owned a brand new car, and there's absolutely nothing unusual about that whatsoever. There have been an awful lot of New Zealanders that have never in their life owned a brand new car. They're just not worth the money. But yeah, I've got a couple of Japan import cars. I've got one, my wife's got one, and they're like, I think mine's 12 years old now. My wife's one's about the same, and that's the norm in New Zealand, I suppose. There are a few European cars, if you want a BMW or a Mercedes-Benz or a Jaguar, as we would say in New Zealand, we'd pronounce it Jaguar. Yes, you can buy those, and there's a few American imports. So if you really, really want to get a Corvette or a Camaro or a Mustang or something like that, they are about, but they're not cheap here in New Zealand. So you'd have to really, really want a car like that to buy one. I mean, really want a car like that. There's a Corvette down at one of the local car dealers for sale at the moment that I quite like the look of, and they're asking $50,000 for it. This is a second-hand Corvette. I don't know exactly what year it is, but it's a front-engined one. It's not one of these newer mid-engined ones. And as I said, it's $50,000, so I suspect it's going to sit there for quite a long time before it sells. But if you wanted a Corvette, that's the kind of thing you've got to pay. If you do want to have a look at what our housing or vehicles go for, then you could have a look at trademe.co.nz. Now, TradeMe is New Zealand's version of eBay. Okay, so if you go online and go trademe.co.nz, that will take you to our, as I said, New Zealand version of eBay, and you can have a look at the price of anything you want to look at the price of, whether it be cars, houses, or whatever. Just see what there is there and what sort of money they're asking for it, and you can look up the exchange rate. Housing in New Zealand is very, very expensive. So, for example, I have a 4-bedroom house. It's got 1 bathroom and 1 ensuite. Now, houses in New Zealand will basically never have more than 2 bathrooms. Never, pretty much. Okay. And it's an older house, but it's 4-bedroom. As I said, it's fairly modest. There's nothing special about the house really. And right now, because of course all the housing market has dropped, my house is going to be worth high 700s, possibly 800,000. Just before the housing bubble popped, my house was worth just over $1 million. As I said, this is just a fairly plain 4-bedroom house. There's absolutely nothing special about it. It's certainly not a mansion or anything like that. And yet it was worth $1 million just before the housing bubble popped, and it will probably go back to being worth that again at some point. So yes, housing is very, very expensive in New Zealand, and like overseas, it's probably going to be very, very difficult for Gen Z people to get into the housing market. They are still doing it, and it is possible, but you have to be committed. You really have to be committed to wanting a house to do it. And in some ways, I don't actually have a problem with that, because I mean, I've heard people complaining, I've heard younger people complaining, I can't afford to go out for drinks and save for a house and go out for dinner and things like that. But to me, that's kind of how it should be. If you want to be saving for a house, you should be saving every penny you can and things. It's what I had to do to get onto the housing market. It's what anyone else has had to do to get onto the housing market. And quite frankly, if you want to go and buy $10 cups of coffee because they're some special flash coffee or whatever every day, when you're at work, or you want to go and buy your lunch every day at work instead of making your lunch at home and taking it to work, then I don't see why you should have the expectation of being able to afford a house. It's all about just, making your priorities, deciding what your priority is, and making the necessary sacrifices to get there. Just thinking what else to say about New Zealand. So New Zealand is very, very much into nature and birds especially. I've heard from people that have come to New Zealand from overseas, they just cannot get over how many the bird sounds. Everywhere you are, you hear birds in the natural bush about you and things. There's just so many birds everywhere in New Zealand, and it's really, really rather pleasant as a result. I think that's probably about all I want to tell you about New Zealand I can think of at the moment. So I'll finish off this video, and since I have only got 2 more paddocks now to weed spray, I promise I will finish those 2 paddocks off before I do another video. So next time I talk to you, I won't be doing weed spraying again. I can promise you I will have another job to do. I don't know what that job will be yet, but I will have another job for you. Okay, thanks. Bye.